My name is Angus Mloud, and I had been shepherding these mountains for near 15 years by then. Scotland, autumn of 1894. The Highlands were turning cruel, the mist clinging to everything like a shroud, and the sheep needed moving down from the high pastures before the first hard frost locked us all in for winter. That particular blend of wet wool and peat smoke meant long days counting heads and longer nights wondering if you had counted right. In that year, it came to mean something else entirely, though we did not know it yet. I was 28 years old, my hands already gnarled as old roots from the wouk, my face weathered dark as saddle leather from the wind. I had come up from Glasgow as a boy, sent to my uncle's farm after my father died in the shipyards. The city never suited me. Too much noise, too many people pressing close. The Highlands gave you space to breathe, even if that breath came cold enough to freeze your lungs half the year. The village of Achmore sat in a narrow glen between two ridges, maybe 40 souls in all. Stone cottages with slate roofs. A kirk that doubled as the schoolhouse. McTavish store where we bought our salt, sugar, and tobacco. And the Boar's Head, where Finlay Ross served whiskey that could strip paint, and a mutton stew that could resurrect the dead. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone's business besides. That was the way of it in places like ours, isolated enough that Edinburgh might as well have been on the moon, but tight-knit enough that a stranger got noticed the moment they crossed the ridge. It was young Robbie Campbell who went missing first, though we did not call it that right away. 8 years old, red-headed and gap-toothed, always underfoot when you were trying to work. His mother, Maura, said he had gone to check the snares in the woods on the eastern slope. When he did not come back by dark, she assumed he had gotten himself turned around in the mist. Easy enough to do, even for locals. His father took a lamp and went looking. He found the snares untouched and no sign of the boy. By morning, half the village was combing those woods. Thank you for listening. To help me continue sharing these accounts, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I went searching with Duncan Kerr, the best tracker in 3 glens, a man who could tell you what a deer had been thinking by the way it placed its hooves. We worked the eastern slope in silence, reading the ground the way men like Duncan read scripture, with patience and absolute attention. We found Robbie's cap near the old limestone caves up on Craig Doob, the Black Crag. Nothing else. No torn clothing. No blood. No tracks leading away. Duncan crouched there in the bracken for near an hour, his weathered face gone pale as porridge. Should be tracks, he finally said, his voice gone quiet in the way men's voices do when they are frightened but refuse to say so. Ground soft from the rain. Should be tracks from him. Tracks from whatever took him. I suggested the boy might have climbed into the cave, perhaps fallen and struck his head. Duncan shook his head slowly. He pointed at the cave mouth, a dark slash in the limestone about 20 feet up the rock face. The brambles at the entrance were undisturbed. Nothing had passed through them in weeks. We went back down and told the searchers. Reverend Macpherson wanted to organize a proper expedition into the caves, but Duncan pulled me aside and kept his voice low. I have seen marks up there, he said. Around the cave. Scratches in the rock. From what? He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes moving briefly toward the other villages before returning to mine. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Glaistig, about the Bean-Nye, said there were things in these mountains older than the stones themselves. He paused. She had another name too, Black Annis, said she lived in the caves and ate children. I had heard the stories. Everyone had. The blue-faced hag with iron claws who scraped out caves with her bare hands and tanned human hides. Children's tales meant to keep the young from wandering near cliff faces and dark holes. I had never given them more thought than that. Duncan, the boy is lost and scared somewhere, maybe hurt. We cannot waste time on fairy stories. But he grabbed my arm, his grip hard enough to bruise. Those scratches in the rock, Angus, they are deep, cut right through limestone. And they are fresh. The search went on for 3 days. We found nothing. Moira Campbell stopped eating, stopped speaking. She sat in her cottage staring at the eastern window, waiting for a red-headed boy who was not coming home. The village tried to move on. What else could we do? Life in the Highlands does not pause for grief. The sheep still needed tending, the peat still needed cutting, and winter still came whether you were ready or not. Then the Murray girl vanished. 10 years old, Margaret Murray. Clever as a fox and twice as quick. She had been gathering firewood not 200 yards from her family's cottage. Her father heard her singing one moment, then silence. He found the bundle of sticks she had been carrying scattered across the path as though she had dropped them in sudden flight. Thank you for listening. To help me continue sharing these accounts, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. That evening, Finlay Ross gathered us at the Boar's Head, every man in the village, and some of the women too, though Reverend Macpherson frowned at that. The peat fire burned in the hearth, and Finlay poured whiskey with a shaking hand. My father's father saw her, he said, without preamble. In 1812, during the year of the bad harvest, 3 children went missing that autumn. They found bones in the caves on Craig Doob. Small bones, child-sized, picked clean. That is enough, Reverend Macpherson snapped. We will not frighten people with superstitious nonsense. But Finlay ignored him. They organized a hunt. 20 men with torches and firearms. They went into those caves. He took a long drink of whiskey. 12 came back out. They would not speak of what they had seen. My grandfather was one of them, and he never went within a mile of that crag again. But he told my father one thing, and made him promise to remember it. Finlay set his glass down carefully on the bar and looked around the room. He said, "She is real. Black Annis is real, and she is hungry in the autumn." The room had gone silent but for the crackle of the fire. Outside, the wind howled through the glen, and somewhere in the darkness the sheep were calling to one another, their voices thin and frightened. Duncan Kerr stood up. "I am going up there tomorrow, to the caves, with a rifle, rope, and lamp oil. Anyone who wants to call me a fool can do it to my face right now, and I will thank them for it. But I am going. I should have stayed silent. I should have thought of my uncle's farm, of the spring lambing season, of all the practical reasons a man has to let other men chase shadows. But I thought of Robbie Campbell's cap lying in the bracken, of Margaret Murray's scattered firewood, of the way Duncan's voice had gone quiet when he said there should have been tracks. "I will go with you," I heard myself say. By the time the meeting broke up, 6 of us had volunteered. Duncan and myself, Finlay Ross, despite his age, young Thomas Grant, who was trying to prove something to his father, and 2 brothers, Ian and Malcolm Scott, who worked the quarry and feared nothing they could hit with a sledgehammer. Reverend Macpherson called us fools and sinners and told us we were feeding panic with superstition. But I saw the fear in his eyes all the same. He knew what we all knew, what we had all been trying not to say out loud. Something was hunting in our mountains, something that took children and left no trace, something that had lived in the darkness of Craig Doob and had been there, waiting and hungry, longer than anyone could remember. None of us slept that night. Thank you for listening. To help me continue sharing these accounts, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. The morning came grey and cold, the mist thick enough to chew. We met outside McTavish's store just as the first pale light bled into the eastern sky. Duncan had brought rope, good hemp rope, the kind that held ships to their moorings, and we each carried oil lamps that barely pushed back the darkness more than a few feet. The Scott brothers carried their quarry hammers. Thomas Grant had his father's old military rifle slung across his chest, the powder horn swinging at his hip. I had borrowed a shotgun from my uncle, loaded with heavy shot meant for boar. Finley carried nothing but a dike, the kind Highland men had carried for centuries. He said that if we got close enough to use it, firearms would not matter anyway. The path up to Craig Doob was not really a path at all, just a sheep track winding through heather and gorse, over tumbled stones slick with moss. The higher we climbed, the thicker the mist became, until we were walking through a grey world where sound came muffled and strange. Our boots crunched on frost-stiffened grass. Our breath plumed white behind us. The village disappeared entirely, swallowed by the fog as though it had never existed. My grandmother used to say the mist was her cloak, Finley said, his voice carrying oddly in the deadened air. That Black Annis wore the fog the way other women wore shawls. Made it easier to take what she wanted without being seen. Your grandmother said a lot of things, Malcolm Scott muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. Duncan stopped suddenly, his fist raised. We froze. He was staring at the ground, his weathered face drained of color. "Hey," he said quietly. "Look, hey." We gathered around where he pointed. There in the soft earth between the stones, clear as daylight despite the fog, were marks. Not footprints. Something stranger. Long gouges, 4 of them parallel, each about as wide as my thumb. They were deep, carved right through the turf to the rock beneath, and they were spaced wrong for any animal I knew. Too wide for a cat, too narrow for a bear. Not that there had been bears in Scotland for 200 years. Claws, Thomas Grant whispered. Duncan nodded slowly. He knelt and placed his hand beside the marks. His entire hand fit in the space between just 2 of them. Whatever made these walks on 2 legs. See how they are grouped? 4 gouges, then a space, then 4 more. That is a stride. A walking stride. Could be old, Ian Scott said hopefully, from weeks ago. But Duncan was already shaking his head. He touched the torn edge of one gouge. Soil is still damp in the cuts. These were made within hours. We stood there in the grey morning, 6 grown men with weapons and rope, and I felt something I had not felt since boyhood. That primitive, hindbrain certainty that something was watching us. That we were being weighed and measured by eyes we could not find. "We keep going," Duncan said. His voice had taken on a flat, resolved tone. The tone of a man who has already accepted that he may not come back down the mountain. The claw marks led upward, following the sheep track almost exactly, as though whatever made them knew the easiest route through the rocks. We found more as we climbed. Scratches on stones where something had dragged those terrible claws for balance, a tuft of wool caught on a thorn bush that had been torn rather than plucked, and once, pressed into a patch of soft mud, something that might have been a handprint if hands came with fingers twice the length of any human's and ended in curved black nails. Thank you for listening. To help me continue sharing these accounts, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. The cave mouth loomed out of the mist like a wound in the rock face, a dark slash in the limestone about 20 feet up, ringed with brambles and tough mountain grass. But standing here now with those claw marks leading straight toward it, The cave seemed different to how I remembered it from the search. It felt malevolent. The darkness inside looked thick, almost solid, the kind that pushes back against light rather than yielding to it. "There," Finley said, pointing at the rock surrounding the entrance. Scratched into the limestone were hundreds upon hundreds of marks, laid over one another like the wall of a cell where a prisoner had been counting days. Some were old, weathered smooth by rain and wind. Others looked fresh, the exposed stones still pale. They formed patterns, not random marks, but deliberate gouges that seemed almost like writing. If writing came from a mind that thought in angles and curves no human language had ever used. "She marks her territory," Finley whispered, "like a beast marks a tree." We rigged the rope to a boulder and Duncan went up first, his boots finding pouches on the limestone as though he had been born to it. The rest of us followed one by one, the rope burning through our palms, even through our gloves. Thomas Grant came last, the rifle strapped across his back, his face set with the grim expression of someone trying very hard not to think about what he was doing. The cave mouth was wide enough for two men to enter abreast, but only if they stooped. The smell hit us before we had gone 3 feet inside. A thick, rotten sweet stench like meat spoiled in summer heat. All of us gagged. Malcolm Scott turned and retched over the edge, his breakfast spattering the rocks below. "What is that?" Ian Scott breathed. "Death," Duncan said simply. "That is the smell of death." We moved deeper. The cave widened after the initial passage, opening into a chamber perhaps 30 feet across. Our lamps pushed back the darkness reluctantly, revealing walls that glistened with moisture, and something else. Something dark and crusted that could have been mud but was not. The floor crunched beneath our boots. Thomas Grant bent down, holding his lamp low, and when he straightened his hands were shaking so badly the flame danced. "Bones," he said. "The floor is covered in bones." They were small. That was the worst part. Delicate as bird bones, white as chalk where they were not stained dark with age and other things I did not want to identify. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, laid so thick in places that they formed drifts against the walls. Finger bones, toe bones, the small curved shells of ribs, and here and there, a skull, empty eye sockets staring at nothing, jaws frozen open in silent, eternal screams. "Oh God," Finley said, his voice cracking apart. "They are children. They are all children." The cave went deeper still. A second passage opened at the back, leading down into an absolute darkness our lamps could not penetrate. From somewhere in those depths came a sound, soft, wet, like something large breathing in its sleep. And underneath that, another sound, a clicking, rhythmic and patient, like long nails tapping slowly against stone. "She is here," Duncan whispered. "She is down there, and she knows we are here." We should have run. Every instinct in every one of us was screaming to turn and scramble back down that rope, to run for the village and never look back. But we had come for answers. We had come because 2 children were missing, and somewhere in these charnel depths they might still be alive, still waiting for men with enough courage to face the darkness. Duncan started forward. "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "We need a plan." That was when the breathing stopped. In the sudden silence we heard it clearly. The clicking had become movement. Something was rising from the depths. Something large, moving with terrible purpose through the dark. We could hear it scraping against the stone walls. Could hear the click, click, click of claws on rock. Could hear something else beneath it. A voice, if you could call it that. A sound halfway between words and the cry of a hunting cat, forming syllables in a language that had never been meant for human tongues. Thomas Grant raised the rifle. His hands had steadied, settling into the calm that comes when terror finally breaks and leaves only cold determination. "Light your lamps," he said quietly. "All of them. I want to see what we are killing." The clicking grew louder, closer, and then at the very edge of our lamplight, where the darkness began its absolute reign, something moved. We caught a glimpse, just a flash, just enough to turn the blood to ice in our veins. A shape that might have been a woman once, if women stood 8 feet tall and bent wrong at every joint. Skin the color of a 3-day corpse, arms too long, hanging nearly to the ground, ending in those terrible claws we had been tracking all morning. And the face, God help us, the face, blue-black, like a bruise, stretched too tight over a skull that was almost human, but not quite. A mouth too wide, filled with teeth like rusted nails, and eyes that caught the lamplight and threw it back at us, pale and hungry and utterly ensientlamed. "Black Annis," she screamed, and the sound was everything the stories had ever promised, and worse. Thank you for listening. To help me continue sharing these accounts, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thomas fired without hesitation. The rifle shot was deafening in the enclosed space, the powder flash lighting up the cave like lightning. I saw the creature jerk as the ball struck somewhere in its torso, but it did not fall. It did not even slow. Instead, it came forward in a scuttling rush, impossibly fast, moving on all fours like a spider the size of a man. "Back!" Duncan roared. "Everyone back to the entrance." We scrambled backward, boots sliding on bones that cracked and splintered beneath us. Malcolm Scott swung his hammer as the thing lunged past him and caught it somewhere along those terrible arms. I heard the impact, heard bone crack, but the creature simply twisted away and kept coming. Its claws scraped the stone floor and threw sparks in the lamplight, and that horrible keening cry never stopped pouring from its throat. Ian Scott was not fast enough. The creature's arm whipped out with a speed that defied the eye, those iron claws catching him across the chest. His shirt opened in 4 neat lines. Blood, black in the lamplight, sprayed across the cave wall. He screamed a high, terrible sound and went down hard among the bones. His brother Malcolm roared something wordless and threw himself at the creature, hammer swinging. This time he connected solidly with what passed for its head. The thing's skull snapped sideways with a crack like greenwood splitting, and for a moment it staggered, those pale eyes rolling. Malcolm hit it again and again, driving it back toward the deeper darkness. "Get him up," Duncan commanded. "Thomas, Finley, cover us. Angus, help me with Ian." We got Ian to his feet, his arms draped over our shoulders, his blood soaking hot through my jacket. I could see white ribs gleaming through the torn flesh. His eyes were wide and terrified, his breath coming in wet, bubbling gasps. Behind us, Malcolm was still attacking, driving the creature back step by step. But watching it, I understood something that froze my heart far more thoroughly than fear. It was not retreating out of pain or desperation. It was drawing him in, leading him away from the group, separating him with a cold, deliberate intelligence that was somehow more horrifying than the claws or the teeth or anything else in that cave. "Malcolm!" Duncan shouted. "Fall back! Malcolm!" But Malcolm Scott was beyond hearing. His brother was dying in our arms, and rage had taken him the way it takes certain men, completely, leaving nothing behind but a single terrible purpose. He pursued the creature into the darkness, and we heard his hammer strike again and again. We heard the creature's shrieks. We heard Malcolm's own voice raised in fury. Then we heard him scream, not a battle cry, a scream of pure terror, suddenly cut short. The sound of the hammer striking stone, then clattering, rolling to a stop, then silence, broken only by that wet breathing and the soft, patient click, click, click of claws on rock. "We have to go," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. "Duncan, we have to go now." We backed toward the entrance, Thomas and Finley keeping their weapons trained on the darkness where Malcolm had disappeared. My lamp had gone out at some point. I did not remember dropping it. In the remaining light from the others, the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, twisting and reaching like living things. Something dragged heavily across stone in the depths. Something that might have been a body. We reached the cave mouth. The gray daylight outside looked impossibly bright after the darkness within. I could see the rope hanging down the rock face. 20 feet. That was all. That was when the creature came for us again. It erupted from the deeper passage like something fired from a cannon, moving so fast it blurred. Finley turned, his dirk flashing. But he was an old man, and it was a young nightmare. The claws took him across the throat. His blood hit the wall in a spray, and he went down without a sound, the dirk falling from nerveless fingers. Thomas fired. The shot caught the creature in the shoulder and spun it around, and I saw it clearly for the first time in full light. The stories had not lied, not in any particular. The blue-black skin stretched tight over inhuman bones, the arms hanging past its knees, corded with muscle like steel cable. The hands, if you could call them hands, with fingers too long, jointed too many times, ending in those black iron claws that had carved out this cave over centuries of patient scratching. But the eyes were the worst. They were human eyes, mad, starving, ancient beyond all reckoning, but human. Whatever Black Annis had been once, she had been a woman, and some small, trapped part of her still remembered it. She looked at us, truly looked, with an intelligence that was somehow more terrible than any mindless savagery could have been. And she spoke. The words came out broken and wrong, shaped by a mouth that had not formed human language in longer than I could imagine. But they were words. "Mine," she hissed. "The children are mine, always mine, given to the mountain, given to the dark." Duncan grabbed the rope and pushed me hard toward it. "Go. Get Ian down and run for the village. Do not stop. Do not look back. Duncan. Go." I went. I grabbed the rope one-handed, Ian's weight dragging at my other arm, and started down. Above me I heard Thomas fire again, heard Duncan shouting something I could not make out. The rope tore the skin from my palms, but I did not feel it. Hand over hand, Ian's blood dripping down onto me from above. We hit the ground and I nearly collapsed. Ian was unconscious, his breathing so shallow I could barely see his chest moving. I looked up. Thomas was descending fast, his face white as paper. Behind him, at the cave mouth, I could see Duncan. He had cut the rope. The severed end fell past Thomas, who grabbed desperately for handholds in the rock. Duncan stood at the cave entrance with his knife in one hand, facing back into the darkness, facing the creature that was even now emerging behind him, those terrible claws reaching forward. "Take care of them," he shouted down at us. Tell them she is real. Tell them to stay away from these mountains. Tell them." Black Annis took him from behind. The claws punched through his back and emerged from his chest, dark with blood. Duncan's eyes went wide, his mouth opening in a soundless cry. Then she dragged him backward into the cave, into the darkness, and he was gone. Thomas fell the last 10 feet, hit the ground rolling, and came up running. Together we carried Ian down the mountain, sliding on loose scree, stumbling through the heather, the mist closing around us like a burial shroud. From the cave high above came a sound, a howl of triumph, perhaps, or hunger satisfied, or maybe just the wind through the rocks. I did not look back to find out. The village saw us coming and met us halfway up the glen. They took Ian from our arms, though I knew even as they did that it was too late. He died on the path before they reached his cottage, bled out on the cold ground with his wife holding his hand and their 3 children watching with wide, uncomprehending eyes. We told them everything, every impossible detail, every horrible truth we had seen in that cave. Reverend Macpherson called us liars and madmen and said we had panicked in the dark and turned on each other. But I saw the fear in his eyes. He knew, they all knew, deep down, what lived in those mountains. A few brave souls went up to the cave in the days that followed, but none made it past the entrance. The rope was gone, taken or destroyed. We never knew. The scratches on the rock were still there, though. Fresh ones, carved deep. A warning, perhaps, or a promise. They found Robbie Campbell's remains 3 days later, washed up in the burn below the crag. What was left of him? Margaret Murray was never found. Neither were Malcolm Scott, Finlay Ross, nor Duncan Kerr. The village tried to go on. What else could we do? But families with children began leaving one by one, finding reasons to move to Glasgow or Edinburgh, or anywhere that did not sit beneath that black crag. By winter, Achmore had half the souls it started with. By spring, half again. Now, 30 years later, there is nothing left but ruins and memories and sheep that will not graze within a mile of the place. I left too. Eventually, went back to Glasgow, found work in the yards like my father before me, built a quiet life, the kind of life that has no room for caves and claws and creatures born from the oldest hungers. But I still dream of that cave sometimes, still see those pale, hungry eyes in the darkness, still hear that voice croaking out words that should never have been spoken by a human throat, still remember the wet sound of Duncan's last breath as the claws punched through him and he looked down, surprised, as though dying had not been part of his plans. They say Black Annis is just a story, a tale told to frighten children. The educated men in their universities laugh at such superstitions, and I do not blame them. I would have laughed once too, but I was there. I saw her. I looked into those mad, human eyes and understood that some hungers are older than civilization, older than mercy, older than anything we would recognize as human. And I know she is still there in her cave on Craig Doob, still scratching her marks into the stone, still waiting for the autumn when hunger drives her down into the glens to take what the mountain provides. The children, she said, always mine, given to the mountain, given to the dark. I pray to God she is satisfied with what she took. I pray that 5 men's lives and 2 children's deaths bought enough peace for whatever time any of us has remaining. But I do not believe it. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls the way it howls in the Highlands, I hear her voice in my dreams. One word, always the same word, in that broken, ancient mouth. Mine, she whispers, always mine, and I wake up screaming. Thank you for listening. To help me continue sharing these accounts, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel.